Hello everyone, have a nice day. Today we'll explore a tense turning point between Miss, Nghia, Lin, and Yuri. One invitation, one instant yes, and a family dinner that feels more like a chessboard than a meal. Watch closely as Lin steps into Miss Nghia's plan with calm confidence, while Yuri senses a trap closing around him. If you find it interesting, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. Yes, I want to be your daughter-in-law, Auntie. The word landed so fast, it didn't even have time to was shy. For half a second, Miss Nghia stayed perfectly still, hands around her untouched cup, posture straight, face calm enough to pass as bored. But her eyes sharpened, the way the air sharpens before lightning, because she'd expected the usual performance: surprise, hesitation, the modest little stammer people use to look worthy. Lin gave her none of it. She held Miss Ghia's gaze and smile were bright, clean, and immediate. Not the careful smile she wore in hallways and elevators. This one belonged to someone who had just heard the exact sentence she'd been quietly rehearsing in her head for weeks. Outside, the rain had stopped less than an hour ago. The city below looked freshly washed, glossy streetlights smeared into long gold lines across the pavement like spilled honey. Inside the private tea lounge, on the second floor, the quiet didn't soothe anyone. It warned you. Miss Nghia reached out, not rushing, and turned the invitation card between two fingers as if it were a blade. Cream paper, embossed lettering, the kind of card that didn't invite you to a dinner, placed you inside a story. You didn't even ask why, Miss Nghia said, voice low. Lin's smile didn't soften. Because I already know. That answer made the room colder and hotter at the same time. Miss Nghia leaned back, eyes unblinking. Then tell me. Lin set the card down gently, like sealing a promise. She leaned forward just enough to show eagerness without looking desperate. You want someone who listens, Lin said softly. Someone who can stand beside your family and never embarrass you. Someone who knows how to keep a secret and how to win. Miss Nghia studied her like a document with hidden clauses. And you think you're that person. I am. A long pause. Miss Ghia's expression didn't move, but the air changed as if the room itself had decided to pay attention. If you become my daughter-in-law, Miss Nghia said, what will you do to protect this family? Lin's smile stayed in place. But her eyes turned seriously hungry again. Only now it was disciplined hunger, the kind that doesn't spill. Tell me the rules, Lin replied, and I'll follow them better than anyone. Miss Ghia's gaze remained unreadable, yet the tea, at last, seemed to stop steaming like even warmth had learned to hold its breath. This wasn't a proposal. It was an alliance. And alliances always come with a price. Miss Nghia tapped the table once, slowly. Good. Then listen carefully. Lin straightened, shoulders back, hands folded on her lap. She looked like a student about to receive a scholarship. But the light in her eyes wasn't gratitude. It was a strategy. In this family, Miss Nghia began, a daughter-in-law is not a decoration. I understand, Lin said quickly. Miss Ghia's gaze didn't soften. Do you? Because I'm not offering you romance. I'm offering you a position. Lin's lips curved as if the honesty pleased her. That's exactly why I said yes. For the first time, Miss Brie. Ghia's face shifted just a fraction. A faint exhale through her nose. Not warmth. Recognition. Honest, Miss Nghia murmured. I can work honestly. She lifted one finger. Rule 1. Image. You will be watched. By the company. By the press. By people who pretend to be friends. I'll be careful, Lynn said instantly. Careful isn't enough. Miss. Nghia leaned forward. You will be spotless. Lynn met her gaze without blinking. Yes, miss. Nghia. Rule 2. Miss. Nghia continued. You don't chase. You don't beg. You don't make yourself look like you're trying to climb. Lynn's smile flickered like a candle in the wind, then steadied. If I'm chosen, I don't need to chase. Miss. Nghia nodded once. Good. People respect what looks inevitable. She lifted a third finger. Rule 3. You don't speak before I do. You don't act before I allow it. Not at the company. Not at home. Not anywhere. Lynn's throat tightened slightly. She hit it well. I follow directions. Miss? Ghia's eyes narrowed. You don't follow directions. You follow me? The words pressed down like a hand on the back of Lynn's neck. For a heartbeat, Lynn's mind ran, calculating, weighing, selecting the right mask. Then she smiled and nodded. Yes. Say it clearly. Lynn's voice turned softer, but stronger. I will follow you. There. A pledge. A surrender. Or a performance, depending on who was listening. Miss. Nghia lifted her cup as if to end the lesson, then set it down again. Now, the uncomfortable part. I'm listening, Lynn said, fingers curling slightly in her lap. You will not mention this conversation to anyone, miss. Nghia said. Not your friends. Not your co-workers. Not even in a careless text. I won't. And you will not try to force him. Miss? Nghia let the words hang, sharp and quiet. No tears. No drama. That only makes men run. Lynn blinked once. You mean, Uri? Miss? Ghia's eyes flicked up, warning. Don't say his name too loudly in places like this. Lynn lowered her voice. Understood. Miss. Ghia's tone turned almost conversational, as if explaining a recipe. He's stubborn. He believes he chooses his own life. If he feels controlled, he'll fight. Lynn tilted her head, thoughtful. Then how do we make him? Except we don't make him. Miss. Ghia's voice stayed calm. We lead him. Lynn's smile widened, impressed. Like guiding someone to think it was his idea. Miss? Ghia's eyes flashed briefly. Exactly. Lynn exhaled, a small laugh that sounded like relief. Then I'm good at that. Miss. Nghia didn't react to the brag. She reached into her handbag again and placed a folded paper on the table, thin, crisp, prepared. Lynn's eyes dropped to it. What's that? A schedule, miss, Nghia said. Where you will be, when you will appear, which events you will attend. Lynn opened it. The list was neat. A charity dinner, a company anniversary, a family gathering. Dates. Times. Names of guests. It wasn't a plan for a relationship. It was a plan for a narrative. Lynn swallowed. You already prepared all this. Miss. Ghia's voice remained steady. I don't ask questions I haven't already answered. Something shifted inside Lynn, half admiration, half fear. She tried to hide it behind enthusiasm, because enthusiasm was safer than honesty. This is perfect, Lynn said. I can do all of it. Miss. Ghia's gaze sharpened. Don't say can. Say will. Lin lifted her chin. I will. Miss. Nghia watched her for cracks, any sign of panic, any sign of greed spilling over the edge. Then she asked, softly, almost casually, why did you say yes so quickly? Lin didn't look away. Her smile held, but her eyes turned glossy, not with tears, with the polished shine of ambition. Because opportunities don't knock twice, Lin said. And because I've been waiting for someone powerful to finally see me. Miss? Nghia stared at her for a long moment. Waiting, miss. Nghia repeated. For someone powerful. Lin nodded. Yes. Be careful with that hunger, miss. Nghia said, voice colder now. It's useful until it becomes obvious. Lin's smile tightened. I know how to hide it. Miss. Nghia leaned forward again, close enough that Ling could smell her perfume clean, expensive, controlled. Good, miss, Nghia said. Because if you embarrass my family, I will remove you. The threat didn't need volume. It was surgical. Lin's heart hammered once in her chest. She didn't let it reach her face. I won't embarrass you, Lin said. I'll make you proud. Miss? Ngia's eyes narrowed. Pride isn't what I want. Lin blinked. Then, what do you want? Miss? Nghia answered without hesitation. Control. The word fell into the space between them and sat there, heavy and unmoving. Lin's smile didn't break, but inside her, something rearranged itself. She'd wanted power. Miss. Nghia was offering power only if Lin agreed to become a tool. Lin glanced down at the schedule again, then backed up. Her voice softened, careful. I can be controlled, Lin said, as long as I'm not disposable. Miss? Nia's gaze flicked, evaluating. Everyone is disposable. The difference is whether you make yourself necessary. Lin's lips parted, then closed. She nodded slowly, as if receiving a lesson she'd always known but never heard out loud. Then I'll be necessary, Lin said. Miss. Nghia leaned back, satisfied. That's the first intelligent thing you've said tonight. Lin's cheeks warmed with pride. Thank you. Miss. Nghia reached for her phone and typed a short message quick, efficiently. Lin watched, trying not to look too eager. What are you doing? Lin asked. Planting your first step, miss. Nghia replied without looking up. She set the phone down and, for the briefest moment, allowed the faintest smile. A family dinner, miss, Nghia said. Soon, you will attend. Lin's eyes sparkled. I'll be ready. Miss? Ngia's gaze hardened again, steel under silk. And one more thing. Lin leaned in, eager. Yes? If anyone asks, miss, Nghia said, voice dropping. You and I have never had this conversation. Lin nodded. Of course, miss. Nghia stood, smoothing her coat. The meeting was over not because they had finished talking, but because Miss Nghia had decided the outcome. Lin rose too, quick and respectful. At the door, Miss Nghia paused. She didn't turn fully around, only enough for Lin to see her profile. You wanted to be seen, Miss, Nghia said. Now you are. Lin's breath caught again, only for a second, then she smiled, radiant. I won't disappoint you, Lin promised. Miss. Ngia's eyes slid toward her, sharp as a warning. Don't disappoint yourself. And then she left. Lin stayed behind, alone with the cold tea and the schedule paper trembling slightly in her hand, not from fear, she told herself, From excitement, she looked at the invitation card again. Daughter-in-law. The word sounded sweet, dangerous, like a lock clicking shut or a door opening. Lynn lifted her phone, fingers moving fast. She typed a message, then stopped. She deleted it. Rule 1. Rule 2. Rule 3. No careless texts. Lynn slipped the schedule into her bag and stood. Outside the lounge window, the city lights glittered like they were celebrating something she hadn't earned yet. Somewhere inside her, a quiet voice whispered, "Instant yes. Instant victory." But victories in families like this, they always came with a bill. And tonight, Lynn had just signed her name. Lynn didn't sleep. Not because she was afraid, she told herself that wasn't it. It was the same restless excitement that used to keep her awake before exams, before interviews, before every moment that could change her life. Only this time, the prize wasn't a job title. It was a seat at the table. By morning, her room looked like a quiet battlefield. 3 outfits laid out on the bed, shoes aligned beneath them, jewelry separated like evidence. She stared at herself in the mirror and practiced expressions the way people practice language, until her face could say grateful without saying greedy, until her eyes could look soft without looking weak. At noon, a small box arrived at her desk with no card, no sender name, just a smooth black package handed to her by a courier who didn't make eye contact. Inside was a pearl hairpin. Simple, expensive in the way that didn't beg to be noticed. Lynn's fingers hovered over it like it might burn. Then she remembered Miss Nghie's voice from the lounge. "You will be spotless." She pinned it into her hair and felt the weight settle behind her ear. Tiny, elegant, unavoidable. A mark. When 7:10 p.m. came, a black car waited outside her building as if it had been there all day. The driver opened the door without a word. Lynn slid in, back straight, hands folded. The city lights passed like moving water. Her reflection flickered across the window, calm face, steady eyes, while inside her, a storm paced in circles. Don't rush. Don't chase. Don't look like you're climbing. Be inevitable. At 7:28 p.m., the car stopped before tall gates and trimmed trees and warm light spilling from wide windows. The house didn't feel like a home. It felt like a fortress that had learned to smile. The front door opened before Lynn reached the steps. Miss Nghia stood there in a dark dress, hair perfect, expression neutral, like she'd been waiting long enough to forget what waiting felt like. Her eyes swept Lynn from head to toe, quick and surgical. "The hairpin, Miss," Nghia said quietly. Lynn touched it lightly, as if acknowledging a crown. "Thank you, Miss." Nghie's mouth curved barely. "On time." "I didn't want to disrespect you," Lynn replied. "Miss." Nghia turned and led her inside. The air smelled like jasmine and polished wood. Every surface reflected light in a way that made the room feel awake. They entered the dining room. A long table, candlelight, plates arranged with impossible precision, food that looked rich enough to be photographed. But Lynn's attention locked on the empty chair at the head of the table. Then footsteps approached. Yuri entered with his sleeves rolled slightly, dark shirt open at the collar, expression tired in the way powerful people get tired, like even exhaustion belongs to them. He stopped when he saw Lynn. Not dramatic. Just one small pause, the kind that says his mind is running calculations he didn't ask for. "Lynn." His voice carried surprise, then suspicion. Lynn lowered her gaze, respectful. "Mr. Yuri." Yuri's eyes snapped to his mother. "Why is she here, Miss?" Nghia didn't blink. Because I invited her. For dinner? Yuri asked. For family dinner, miss. Nghia corrected, as if the word family was a door only she could unlock. Lin remained still, hands folded. She could feel Yuri's gaze on her like heat. Yuri's jaw tightened. You didn't tell me. Lin lifted her eyes just enough to meet his, then lowered them again. I didn't think it was my place. Miss. Nghia gestured toward the table. Sit. Yuri hesitated one breath, too long then, sat as if lowering himself onto thin ice. Lin sat when Miss. Nghia sat. She moved like she belonged. For the first 10 minutes, Miss. Nghia spoke as if nothing had changed. She commented on the food. She mentioned an upcoming charity dinner. She talked about reputation, image, and the company's niche in the market as if she were discussing weather. Yuri barely touched his plate. Lin ate small bites, graceful and measured. She didn't look hungry. She didn't look nervous. She looked ready. Then Miss. Ngia's voice softened, almost gentle. Lin, she said, do you want to marry into this family? The room frozen. Yuri's fork stopped midair. Lin's heartbeat rose into her throat, then she forced it back down, like swallowing a secret. She glanced at Yuri for a fraction of a second. His eyes were sharp, demanding. He looked like he was waiting to catch her in a lie. Lin turned back to Miss. Nghia smiled modestly, brightly, and controlled. Yes, she said, if you want me to. Yuri's chair shifted with a small scrape. What? Lin turned toward him, voice still soft. Miss. Nghia asked me to be her daughter-in-law. Yuri stared at her like he didn't recognize the shape of her words. And you said yes? Lin met his gaze. Candlelight warmed her face, but her eyes stayed clear. I said yes instantly, she replied, almost tender. Because I didn't want to lose the chance. For a moment, Yuri's expression flickered with shock, anger, and something like disbelief. Then he set his fork down. The sound was quiet, but it landed like a warning shot. Mom, Yuri said, voice low. What did you promise her, Miss? Nghia lifted her glass and took a slow sip. Nothing, I asked. She answered. Yuri's eyes cut back to Lin. You answered like it was already decided. Lin's fingers curled beneath the table. Maybe it is, she whispered. Yuri leaned forward, shadows carving his face. Do you even understand what you're stepping into? Lin didn't look away. I think I do. Miss. Nghia placed her glass down with a soft click. Good, she murmured. Because the next step begins tonight. Yuri's eyes narrowed. What next step? You'll take her to the charity dinner, Miss. Nghia said calmly. As my guest. As your companion. Yuri's voice tightened. No. Miss. Ngia's tone didn't rise. Yes. Silence slammed down between them, thick and final. Yuri stood abruptly, chair scraping back. This is insane. Miss. Nghia didn't move. Sit down, Yuri. He didn't. Miss. Ngia's gaze sharpened, steel beneath silk. If you walk away, you're not walking away from dinner. You're walking away from your future. Yuri's chest rose once, heavy. He looked at his mother. Then Lin really looked, as if searching for the moment she became part of the trap. His voice dropped, quiet and sharp. What do you really want, Lin? Lin lifted her chin slightly. The pearl hairpin caught the candlelight like a small, steady star. She opened her mouth, and the front doorbell rang.
Linh chấp nhận lời cầu hôn bất ngờ của bà Nghĩa, coi đó như một cơ hội hiếm có hơn là một lời tỏ tình lãng mạn. Ngày hôm sau, bà Nghĩa lặng lẽ đánh dấu Linh là người được chọn bằng một chiếc chông cài tóc ngọc trai đơn giản và mời cô đến dự bữa tối riêng tư của gia đình. Tại ngôi nhà sang trọng của bà Nghĩa, Uri sững sờ khi thấy Linh đang đợi ở bàn và lập tức hỏi tại sao cô lại ở đó. Bà Nghĩa kiểm soát căn phòng một cách bình tĩnh và chính xác, lái cuộc trò chuyện về hôn nhân như thể mọi chuyện đã được quyết định. Linh trả lời một cách lịch sự nhưng dứt khoát thừa nhận rằng cô đã đồng ý ngay lập tức vì không muốn bỏ lỡ cơ hội. Sợ nghi ngờ của Uri biến thành sự tức giận khi bà Nghĩa yêu cầu anh đưa Linh đến một bữa tiệc từ thiện. Với tư cách là người đi cùng, Uri đòi hỏi sự thật thì bỗng nhiên chuông cửa reo.